Here's what's coming up on the program today. NATO says it has not seen de-escalation yet, as Russia says some troops positioned on the border with Ukraine are returning to their bases. President Vladimir Putin says Russia does not want war in Europe, but repeats claims of genocide in breakaway areas of eastern Ukraine. And 4 dead, 15 missing as a Spanish trawler sinks off Canada. Welcome, everyone. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. After a build-up raised fears of an invasion, Russia's defense ministry says some troops positioned on the border with Ukraine are returning to their bases after completing drills. The defense ministry says large-scale drills continue, but that some units are returning to their bases. There's been no independent confirmation of the withdrawal, and international powers have reacted cautiously to the announcement. The head of the NATO Defense Alliance says he has not seen de-escalation yet, but the signals from Moscow give some cause for optimism. More than 100,000 Russian troops have massed at Ukraine's border. Russia has always denied it is planning an attack.
There are signs from Moscow that diplomacy should continue. This gives grounds for cautious optimism. But so far, we have not seen any sign of de-escalation on the ground. Russia has amassed a fighting force in and around Ukraine, unprecedented since the Cold War. Everything is now in place for a new attack. But Russia still has time to step back from the brink, stop preparing for war, and start working for a peaceful solution.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin, speaking at a news conference today, said Russia does not want war and so has put forward proposals to start a negotiation process, but says there has been no constructive response to Russia's proposals. President Putin also repeated claims of genocide in breakaway areas of eastern Ukraine without providing evidence. He says the issue of whether Ukraine would be allowed to join NATO in the future needs to be resolved now, even though Ukraine is far from even starting a membership application. However, he says Moscow is still prepared to discuss some issues, including European security and missiles. The United States ambassador to Ukraine says it's assessing Russian claims that some of its troops are returning to base after exercises near Ukraine. Russia has not said how many units are being withdrawn and how far after a buildup of some 130,000 Russian troops to the north, east and south of Ukraine. It has triggered one of the worst crises in relations with the West since the Cold War.
We have also noticed today that Russia is claiming that they are moving towards some sort of de-escalation. We are monitoring the situation. I don't have anything further to say about that. We'll have to verify whether or not that is in fact the case. I think de-escalation is exactly that, and that means moving those troops, moving your force posture away from Ukraine's border, out of Ukraine. We've seen up to 30,000 troops moving into Belarus. Obviously, we would have to see much of that force posture shift for us to feel reassured about de-escalation. But again, I don't have much to share because these reports just came out. We'll assess the situation. We will work to try and verify and go from there.
Let's talk about this now, the situation on the ground. Joining us from Moscow is the VOA's Ricardo Marquina. Ricardo, thanks for joining us again. The news of some troops returning to base certainly raises hopes that tensions could ease, but military exercises continue as we speak. Do we have any idea how many units are being withdrawn from the border?
Thank you for having me. No, we don't have numbers. We only know that the troops that are going back, there are the troops that are regularly based in the south and the west of Russia. So there are troops that anyway, they will not be far away from Ukrainian border. And we are sure that the big numbers still near the border, and these 30,000 soldiers, Russian soldiers, that they are making exercises in Belarus. So still there are huge number of Russian troops near the border. We can assume that maybe a few thousand of these Russian soldiers that are going back today to their original positions.
Yeah, and still trying to get into Russia's mind exactly what this means. But despite Ukraine being far from even starting a membership application, President Putin says the issue of whether Ukraine will be allowed to join NATO in the future needs to be resolved now. Why is it such a major point for the president? And can there be hope for a de-escalation if Russia demands regarding this issue is not met?
Well, the question maybe is not why, the question is maybe why now? What make this 2022 special that was not 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? What happened that triggered this huge military reaction from Russia? It's something that honestly I can't understand why it's happening right now. Why is this easy question? Russia wants to push back NATO as far they can. They are, of course, not happy to have them in Baltic states, in Poland, but they absolutely don't want them in Ukraine. So what will happen now if NATO, if Ukraine don't refuse to this way to NATO? This is, of course, the big question. Will be Russia accept some kind of Ukrainian integration in NATO? Very difficult to see the future right now.
Yeah, pretty difficult, and that's what the negotiations are supposed to reveal, right? With the talks expected to continue throughout the week. Talk to us about that, will you? The diplomatic talks to de-escalate the tensions over Ukraine in the coming days?
So this last week or 2 weeks, we have this meeting with the president of France, Germany, conversation with Biden by phone. All seems we are going to the direction to be back to the Normandy format. So a conversation between France, Germany, and Ukraine and Russia. This is it seems to be the more logical next step for Russia. Russia wants to push Ukraine to fit the Minsk agreement. And this is very difficult because Kiev saw a few times that this agreement is not valid anymore for their point of view. So it's I think the next week we will see Russia to try to push for a new meeting of the Normandy format.
Ricardo, just before you go, I mean, we've heard from the West, what it intends to do if Russia invades Ukraine, and Russia has stated its own terms and its demands. What does Ukraine want out of all of this?
Kiev is very, they put very simple rules. They want to implement the Minsk agreement, but in their terms. So they don't want negotiate directly with the authorities of these two republics, Donetsk and Lugansk. Of course, Kiev want to recover the sovereignty, the control of this territory, and the most complicated thing is to recover the Crimea sovereignty. This is the most complicated. Someone can say that it's almost impossible to Kiev to control and never again this territory, because Russia say that this will be never negotiable.
Yeah, and it all falls now to Ukraine's partners now to help with its own ambitions. Ricardo, a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Away from the crisis in Ukraine, but in Russia. Now, a new trial against a jailed opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, has begun inside the maximum security prison east of the capital, Moscow, where he's being held. Navalny is accused of fresh fraud charges. He has already spent a year behind bars after surviving a poison attack that he blames on the Kremlin. He's currently serving a 2.5-year sentence. The latest trial could see his prison time extended by more than a decade. A 45-year-old was detained when he returned to Russia in January 2021 after months of treatment in Germany for a near-fatal Novichok nerve agent attack in Siberia. A North Korean expert, Jong Se-hyun, says Pyongyang's missile tests in early 2022 appear to show that North Korea is attempting to boost its military capabilities and clamp down on control of its citizens at the same time as calling for negotiations with the United States. In January, North Korea conducted 7 missile tests, including Intermediate Range Ballistic Missiles, IRBM for short, for the first time since 2017. After North Korea tested several hypersonic missiles, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said they were profoundly destabilizing and that some of this is North Korea trying to get attention. The administration of President Joe Biden says it is open to talks with North Korea without preconditions, but those overtures have been rebuffed, and the White House has not made the standoff a major talking point. North Korea expert and South Korea's former Minister of Unification Ministry, which is in charge of the inter-Korea relations, Se-hyun, says the North wants to set conditions for new talks. Our eyes still on the global pandemic. Australian nurses strike over COVID spurred staff shortages and pay conditions. Plus, Hong Kong's rules out citywide lockdown despite COVID spiral. Here's more in the update.
Thousands of nurses in Australia's most populous state walked off the job on Tuesday for the first time in nearly a decade to begin a 24-hour strike after talks with the government to plug staff shortages and secure a pay rise failed. Nurses and midwives across New South Wales defied a last-minute order by the State Industrial Relations Commission to call off the strike, which it says could put public health in danger.
We deserve better. We need more staff on the wards. Our patients aren't safe. Most of the time the staff are overworked and it's stressed, and it's just not fair. It's not fair. We don't ask for much.
Nurses had sought a pay rise of more than 2.5% and better nurse-to-patient ratios. The strike will be staggered through the day and will include staff from more than 150 hospitals around the state.
We've been struggling. A lot of our nurses have been burnt out, doing doubles, struggling every day.
The arrival of the fast-moving Omicron variant in Australia in late November fueled a surge in COVID-19 infections, accounting for the bulk of the country's total of around 2.6 million confirmed cases and overwhelmed hospitals from more than 150 hospitals around the state. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam on Tuesday rolled out a citywide lockdown to fight COVID-19. But the surge of infections meant she could not preclude the possibility of postponing next month's chief executive election. Lam, who has not confirmed whether she will seek another 5-year term as head of the Chinese-ruled city, says her government's response to the outbreak had not been satisfactory, with hospitals and medical staff overwhelmed. Daily infections have surged about 20 times over the past 2 weeks, and Lam says authorities are unable to keep pace with their testing and isolation mandate. Hong Kong recorded 1,619 COVID-19 infections on Tuesday as their overwhelmed health system approached maximum capacity, with daily infections surging by about 20 times over the past 2 weeks. Health authorities say several hospitals were operating at over 100% capacity at Caritas Medical Center, located on the city's teeming Kowloon Peninsula. Dozens of patients lay in numbered beds outside the hospital. Makeshift tents had been set up alongside to treat the patients. Freedom Convoy protesters were seen dancing in Ottawa as demonstrations against COVID policies entered their 3rd week in the city. A small crowd gathered on the streets of the Canadian city to dance as tents being used to house supplies for the protesters were erected. In response to the ongoing protest, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced he will activate rarely used emergency powers, including cutting off financing to end protests that have shut some border crossings and paralyzed parts of the capital. The Freedom Convoy protest, started by Canadian truckers opposing a COVID-19 vaccinate or quarantine mandate, have drawn people opposing the Prime Minister's policy on everything from pandemic restrictions to carbon tax.
Still ahead on The World Today. Tennis star Novak Djokovic says he's not against vaccinations, but will not be forced to take the COVID jab. Stay with us. Welcome back. What is the price of freedom? To tennis star Novak Djokovic, it could be the future tennis trophies he might win, which he says is willing to forfeit rather than being forced to get a COVID vaccine. Speaking to British media earlier today, Djokovic said he should not be associated with the anti-vax movement, but supports an individual's right to choose. When asked if he would sacrifice taking part in competitions such as Wimbledon and the French Open over his stance on the vaccine, he says yes, it's a price he's willing to pay. The 20-time Grand Slam winner was deported from Australia last month after the government cancelled his visa in a row over his vaccine status. Djokovic, who's the world's #1 men's tennis player, said he had obtained a medical exemption to enter the country to play in the Australian Open as he had recently recovered from COVID-19. At least 4 people have died, 15 others still missing after a Spanish fishing boat sank off Canada's east coast. 3 crew members have been rescued and efforts to find survivors are continuing. According to reports, a crew of 24 included 16 Spanish plus Peruvian and Ghanaian nationals. The vessel, which was based in the port of Marin in the Spanish region of Galicia, sank in waters off Canada's Newfoundland. 3 survivors were found in a lifeboat suffering from hypothermia. 2 other empty lifeboats have been found and rescuers are looking for a 4th. Exactly 6 months since the Taliban came to power in Kabul, many residents of the capital of Afghanistan say they remain uncertain about their future. A combination of a lack of jobs, assets that remain frozen, as well as an increase in hunger and poverty. Central bank funds have been frozen since the Taliban took over as foreign forces withdrew in August. This, combined with sanctions and a drop-off in development funding, has sent the country's economy into freefall, unleashing a humanitarian crisis with it. On Friday, the White House said the U.S. was seeking to free up half of the $7 billion in frozen Afghan central bank assets on U.S. soil to help the Afghan people, while holding the U.S. to possibly satisfy terrorism-related lawsuits against the Taliban. Afghanistan's central bank criticized the plan, calling it an injustice. The Taliban warns it would reconsider its policy towards the U.S. if President Joe Biden does not reverse his decision to return only half the amount. A brother of Pakistani social media star Qandil Balok has been acquitted of her murder. Mohammed Wasim was sentenced to life in prison after confessing to killing Ms. Balok, dubbed the Kim Kardashian of Pakistan, in July 2016. And at that time, he said it was because the star had brought shame to the family. A court order has yet to be made public, but lawyers say it comes after Wasim retracted his confession and his parents called for his release. So facing a lawsuit, Prince Andrew has settled a civil sexual assault case brought against him in the U.S. by Virginia Giuffre. Miss Giuffre had been suing the Duke of York, claiming he sexually assaulted her on 3 occasions when she was 17. Allegations he has repeatedly denied. A document submitted to a U.S. court show the Duke and Miss Giuffre had reached an out-of-court settlement. The document says he would make a substantial donation to her charity. The document stated that Prince Andrew had never intended to malign Miss Giuffre's character and that he recognized she had suffered both as an established victim of abuse and as a result of unfair public attacks. And finally on the program, looking for a chance to walk in the footsteps of Nelson Mandela. Look no further than the Sanctuary Mandela, a former residence of the South African president, an anti-apartheid icon in Johannesburg, which has now been turned into a boutique hotel. It was opened in September. The hotel promises guests a blend of tranquility, heritage and mindful experiences, including a fine dining restaurant that serves dishes inspired by Mandela's favorite meals. Take a look.
To preserve and honor the legacy of South Africa's iconic leader, Nelson Mandela, his home, which was a symbol of his presidency and struggle against apartheid, has now been transformed into a luxury hotel. Sanctuary Mandela, as it is now called, was the former president's first home in Johannesburg after being released from his 27-year-long imprisonment. Surrounded by lush gardens, the property has 9 rooms that can accommodate a total of 18 guests. The walls are also covered in memorabilia, paying tribute to the global icon.
You couldn't go wrong with that when you give him vegetables, but it must be a variety of vegetables because he will tell you that put color, there must be color of the vegetables on the plate. Then he loved and he liked very much oxtail stew, of which right now here we are having a ravioli taken from the oxtail stew. So we made it a ravioli. So that one, 3 days in a week, you must have oxtail in his house with sam and beans, that is umusho in our language.
The property was designed to be a space of reflection and tranquility, and it offers guests an opportunity to connect and intimately experience Mandela's hospitable nature. Mandela lived on the premises between the year 1992 to 1998.
It feels so good. It feels so, I don't know what words I feel so honored. I must say I feel so honored that they still remember that this is the person that can take us to where Dada used to come from.
After enjoying lunch at the Sanctuary Mandela, dinner guest Lyndon Matabane listed the reasons she loved the Red Roof Spanish Villa-style hotel, which opened late last year.
The place is divine. Whoever came with this concept, I wouldn't have thought something like this, and everything is beautiful. The people, the service you receive here, everything is just to the tops. And yeah, as she said, the feeling, it's like you could feel Mandela's presence somehow in this place. And as I was going around the tour, you know what, I could feel something that this man, you know, even though he passed on, but he still lives, he's still around us.
Mandela's dream of a more equal South Africa remains aspirational, as the design of the hotel is a blend of South Africa's rich history, while still maintaining modern and glamorous look and feel.
And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.